Well, good evening. It's time to start with our class tonight. If you would be opening your Bibles to Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13. Our study is going to begin tonight in verse 11. Revelation chapter 13 and verse 11. Jadon, would you lead us in prayer to start us off tonight?
Most loving and gracious Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this time you've given us to come gather together and study another portion of our Word. We're thankful for each and every one here tonight. We pray for those who are able to be with us. Be thy will, they might do return. We're thankful, Lord, for this land in which we live, that we gather together and study your word without fear of being oppressed. Lord, we pray for those people in Texas who lost loved ones, the tragedies that occur every day. We pray that you comfort them as only you can. Lord, as we about to begin this study, we pray that we keep in our minds and in our hearts Jesus Christ and all that he did for us. He was the sacrifice for our sins upon that cruel cross. There suffered, bled, and died, and was raised again on the third day, that through him we might have hope for eternal life. Pray, Lord, that you forgive us for any sins. We have a home in heaven with thee. In Christ's name we pray.
Amen. The last 2 weeks we've been looking at chapter 13 and the first 10 verses, taking a look at this image of the first of two beasts that we see revealed to John here in this chapter. And after considering the things that we've discussed the last couple of weeks, we come to the conclusion that the Emperor Domitian, as we talked about last Wednesday night, a man who reigned over Rome from 81 to 96 AD, very closely fits the description of what we see in this first beast, especially when we consider the internal biblical evidence that states there in Revelation 1 and verse 1 that what is being revealed were things that must shortly come to pass. Now you remember in our introduction of the book of Revelation, we talked about the fact that the approach that we're taking to Revelation is not that it was written earlier in the first century. There are some that believe that it was written prior to the fall of Jerusalem. Some believe that it was written after or shortly after the fall of Jerusalem. But as we've discussed previously, I believe that it fits the context as well as the historical evidence of things that were transpiring nearer to the end of the first century. And so generally, you find scholars believing that the book of Revelation was written somewhere around the year 96 AD. Well, I just told you that the Emperor Domitian reigned from the year 81 to the year 96 AD. We learn from history that Domitian was the first of the emperors to advance the idea that the emperor could be considered a god while still living. Prior to that time, the emperors that had reigned, they believed that once an emperor had died, then that person could be classified as a god. But Domitian was somewhat of an arrogant person, and he believed that that praise and that acclaim should be attributed to him while he was still alive. And so he declared himself as Supreme Lord and God. And it got to the point where if he received any type of correspondence, if it was not ascribed to supreme Lord and God Domitian, he would not even open it. He would not read the correspondence. He would have nothing to do with it. And so, whenever we look at the fact that this first beast is demanding worship, that he is one that is in a position of authority, that the dragon, indicative of Satan, is the one that has given him the power and the authority to do the things that he is doing. But also, we see mention of the fact that all of those in the world, or all of those in the inhabited world, were bowing down to the beast. Well, one of the monikers or the descriptors that was often given to the Roman Empire was that they had came to conquer the whole inhabited world. And we think about the fact that the body of water that was there bordering much of the Roman Empire was the Mediterranean Sea. And you look at the meaning of that term, Mediterranean. It literally is the middle of the earth. And so if we gave that a literal name, it would be the sea that is in the middle of the earth, or in the middle of the inhabited world. So as this says, all people were bowing down before this first beast. Now, we understand that that was to the exclusion of one group, Christians. Christians were not bowing down before this beast. They were not giving their allegiance to Caesar. But all of those who were Roman citizens, all of those that wanted to maintain their position and their rights as Roman citizens, they were bowing down before Caesar. They were worshiping him. They were paying tribute to him. We see that with the Jews, they were not expected to worship Caesar in the way that the Romans were, but they still had their own way. They had an agreement that they had worked out with Caesar, and this is something that is amazing to me. The Jews had worked out an agreement that they did not have to bow down to Caesar so long as they prayed to their God on behalf of Caesar. And that was something that it's hard for me to comprehend, that type of agreement being made, especially with this type of a man. But that was the compromise that the Jews had come up with Caesar. That so long as they prayed for Caesar and praised him to their God, then they did not actually have to bow down before Caesar. But no other emperor in history fits this description of this first beast, or the sea beast as he's sometimes described, any more so than Domitian. But then let's come into this second section of this chapter. Verses 11 through 18, we're going to see a second beast that's going to be revealed. And let's begin by reading these verses. Beginning in verse 11, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword, and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Pretty vivid imagery there, isn't it? Well, in verse 11, we see the second beast coming up out of the earth, as opposed to the first beast, which came up out of the sea. Also, with this earth beast, we see that he has only 2 horns, where with the land beast, how many horns did he have? He had 10 horns. Had 7 heads, but had 10 horns. But in this image, and I want you to picture this, notice it says that this beast has come from the earth, that he has 2 horns, but he has the image of what? What's he look like? He looks like a lamb. Well, in the book of Revelation, what is the lamb indicative of? Jesus Christ. That which is pure, that which is holy, that which is good. And so this beast has come forth, and he appears to be good. He appears to be religious, appears to be doing the work of God. But notice what it says next. But he speaks like the dragon. He appears to be that which is good, that has the people's well-being in mind. But yet when he opens his mouth, the things that he declares, that he stands for, are those things that are endorsed by Satan, not by God. The horns are symbolic of power and authority, just as we saw with this first beast and him having 10 horns. Well, these 2 horns, symbolic of power and authority, but the earth beast having only 2 horns shows us that he is of a lesser degree of authority or a lesser degree of power than what we saw with the first beast. But also, whenever we go back and we look at the sea beast, you remember that we presented this from the standpoint of those 10 heads being the emperors that had reigned over the Roman Empire, starting with Augustus and leading up to Domitian. Well, if those heads are indicative of literal figures, then it would be inconsistent for us to now look at this beast and with its horns and heads and everything that is personified here, for us to then look at this and say, well, the sea beast was talking about literal people, but this is talking about something symbolic. And so whenever we look at this, we see the image of a literal person. No, this person is not actually going to come forth from the earth. They're not literally going to have 2 horns on their head. They're not going to bear this exact image. But the characteristics, just as we saw Domitian personified in the image here of the sea beast, we're now going to see another individual personified in this land beast. So we see this image. He has 2 horns indicative of power. He doesn't have a full degree of power like we saw with the sea beast, having authority over the 10 regions and the emperors that were there. Doesn't have that power and that authority. But yet, he has this to a lesser degree. He's taking on the image of that which is religious, that which is holy. But yet, what he is actually carrying out is the work of the devil. Now, it's important to notice that in the text, notice that it describes the one with the horns as being like unto a lamb. Notice it does not say that it is the lamb, like unto a lamb. And so this earth beast, he is exercising all of the authority of the first beast. He is the one that is carrying out the things, the mandates, and the actions that the first beast have put into effect. He's operating under the direct authority of Domitian. So whatever authority Domitian had at the time, whoever is being described in this image as the land beast is the one that was carrying out the will of Domitian. But keep in mind, by the figure of a lamb being used, this would have been someone that was carrying out the religious wishes of Domitian, trying to present Domitian as that which was good and worthy of worship and the praise of the people. Specifically, we see that this second beast was given the authority to enforce the worship of the emperor. So in this, we could say that the first beast, Domitian, was the administrator. He was the one that decided what was going to be done. But this second beast, the land beast, we could describe him as the enforcer. He was the one that went out and made sure what Domitian wanted to be accomplished was actually what was being done. But with that in mind, let's look at some of the other things that it says. Notice that it says that power was given to the earth beast to do great signs in the sight of men. Notice it says even to the point of being able to call fire down from heaven upon the earth. All right, this immediately raises a question. That question is this: were these actual signs and miracles, or were these deceptions and optical illusions? You know, we've talked a lot in our classes and in sermons in the past. What was the purpose of miracles? Someone speak up and tell me. What was the purpose of miracles? To prove the message of God. So, we go back and we look at what we've already seen about this second beast. He's speaking like the dragon. He is taking the authority of Domitian. He's demanding that they worship the emperor. So how could we then logically argue that this person is actually performing signs and wonders? We couldn't. Because the Holy Spirit was the one that facilitated those things. And this individual would not be one that had the ability to do this. But we can go all the way back into the Old Testament. And how many times have we seen those who were able to perform, and for lack of a better term, were able to perform wonders? Things that people could not explain. But yet they were doing that without the power of God. I want you to think for just a moment in Exodus chapter 7, verses 10 through 12. When Moses and Aaron have come before Pharaoh, demanding that he let the children of Israel go, Aaron came and he threw down his rod, and what happened? It turned into a snake. Well, Pharaoh called for the King James Version says his magicians. Some other translations say for his sorcerers. They came, and what did they do? They threw theirs down, and what happened? Well, it said they became as serpents. Was that the power of God that allowed that to happen? No, they were doing this through their deceptive arts. And you remember Aaron's rod came and swallowed up theirs. Well, this is a sign that God's power is supreme to any other power. That this really was as the song says, wonder-working power of God. This was not a figment of imagination or some type of optical illusion. But then if you look at Exodus 7 and verse 14, you go back here to where we're in Revelation 11, and you look at verse 14. It gives us the answer as to whether these were real signs or if they were false. It says, "And he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by reason of the signs which it was given him to do in the sight of the beast." So were they real signs? No, they were deceptions. This calling down fire from heaven, it wasn't actually calling down fire from heaven. They had facilitated some way to make it appear that way. It was not something that they were actually doing that was miraculous in nature. Now, the text tells us that they were deceptions. Now, they were ones that were convincing, but they were deceptions nonetheless. How many times have we either watched on television or gone and seen a magician and they do some type of trick or some type of an illusion, and they get to the end of the trick and we sit there and wonder, how did they do that? Well, it's not that they had any kind of special powers. They had certain deceptions. They had the art of illusion. They had sleight of hand. They had things that they were able to use that caused wonder among the people. It's convincing, but it's still deceptive. So we see those in Rome. They witnessed these things that were being performed. And they said, well, if there's this type of miraculous power, then there has to be something to what this second beast is saying. There has to be something there that is authorizing the worship of Domitian. But notice it goes even a step further. Notice it goes on then to say that they could even make it appear as if the idol of Domitian was speaking. Now, I think we all can conceive in our minds some ways that would have been possible. Someone could have hidden behind the idol and spoken as if the idol was spoken. Some commentators said that this idol could have been on a smaller scale, and someone was there working it as if it was a ventriloquist dummy, something of that nature. But it was not literally the idol speaking. It was someone speaking through this idol, but it was so convincing that the people believed that it was actually the idol that was speaking. And so once again, the people were looking at this inanimate object, and they were thinking, well, power has been given for this thing to speak? Domitian must have the power of a god. If he's able to work these kinds of things. Now remember, Domitian himself is not the one that's facilitating all of this. It's this second beast. And we've yet to conclude who this second beast is referring to. We've talked about the type of person that it is. We've talked about the authority. We've talked about the image that they took on. But ultimately, what they were enforcing emperor worship. Well, as the text goes on to say, we now come to this infamous mark of the beast. And so many times we hear people today talking about the mark of the beast and how it's this number 666. And I've talked in the past about how I've known song leaders that wouldn't sing song 666 out of the hymnal and things of that nature. They avoid that number. I've been standing at a cash register before and someone has rang up the products that I had and they said, oh, you need to buy something else. Well, why is that? Well, the price is $6.66. So many times people have this misconception. Folks, it's just a number. It's just a number. Those numbers are symbolic. Now, you may remember when we were talking about symbolic numbers at the first part of our study of Revelation, the number 6 indicates that which falls short of the perfect number 7. And so the number 6 is often indicative of sinful man. And so, whenever you put 3 6s together, It's just there for emphasis. It's just there to, when someone sees this, they're saying, well, this is indicative of someone that is evil, evil, evil. Just as we would emphasize it today by repeating that word evil. Like if I made the statement that someone is a bad person, and then I come back and I say, no, that person is a bad, bad, bad person. Which one of those is going to have the most impact upon your thoughts about that individual? The one that I emphasized. And so that's what we see here. And whenever it says that this is the number of a man, some people look at that and they say, well, that's saying that eventually a man's going to come along and he's going to take upon himself this number 666. He's going to bear it upon his person and he's going to be this second beast. No. The number 6 is the number of sinful man in the eyes of the Jews. And so when you put that number together, 666, it's simply saying that this person is completely evil, completely wicked. They're not accomplishing anything good. But we go back to the end of the first century. And there was something that was going on in Rome that also bears explaining. There was a certain mark. And generally, what this would be, it would be some type of certificate, some kind of paper that would have the seal of the emperor placed upon it. And if an individual did not have that certificate, then they were not allowed to function in Roman society. And what that meant, they were not allowed to buy or sell to any Roman citizen. They were not allowed to obtain any type of licenses, including the license to marry. Their marriage would not be sanctioned by the Roman government if they did not have this seal. They were not allowed to participate in any of the programs that the Roman government had developed. But history has recorded this, and I wanted to share this with you. Each person was required to come before this image of Domitian. They were required to pay a certain tribute, and then they were required to bow down before this idol. And then, after doing this, they were to go over to one of what they referred to as their priests. They were to go over to one of the priests of Domitian, and they were to make this statement. To those who have been appointed to preside over the sacrifices from, and then they would state their name, from the village of, and they would say where they were from, together with his children. And then he would name off all of those in his immediate household. We have always sacrificed to the gods, and now in your presence and according to the regulations, we have sacrificed and offered libations and tasted the sacred things. And we ask that you give us a certification that states we have done so. May you fare well. And then they would state their name once again. After making this statement, they would then receive a certificate. And that certificate would state, we, the representatives of Emperor Domitian, have personally witnessed your sacrificing. And then they would sign it and put upon it the seal of Domitian. Well, once this was authenticated, then they were able to go and they were able to function as Roman citizens. But if they did not have this, then ultimately they were seen as outcasts. Even if they came from Roman lineage, if they were not willing to go through this process and receive this certification, then they could not function as Roman citizens. So who is this second beast? That's what we've been coming down to. Who is this second beast? Well, when you study Roman history, especially during the time of Domitian, we find an organization that was established and their express goal was to enforce worship of the emperor. Their name was the Roman Concilia. They were also sometimes known as the imperial cult. They were originally formed during the reign of Augustus. But we find that as time passed by, their influence began to spread. And then when Domitian declared himself to be a god, they became less of a political entity and took more upon themselves the identity of a religious cult or a religious organization. I've seen some that have described them as a religious police force, because they would go about, and if they found someone that refused to bow before the emperor, they had the authority to throw that person into prison or to put that person to death. But they would go into the different cities in the empire, and they would ensure that those who were transacting business had this certification. They would make sure that those who were being married had this certification. They would make sure that those who were transacting business, even those that were going and purchasing food for their family, these concilia would be there, and you would have to prove to them that you had worshipped Caesar. And if you did not have the ability to do that, then you were considered a criminal. You would be arrested, and ultimately you could be put to death. Now, of course, to the Christians, the Roman Concilia was an object of great disdain, but was also an object of great fear. Because they knew what these individuals were able to accomplish. And they continued to grow in power, grow in strength, until ultimately a deviant form of Christianity arose during the time of Emperor Constantine. But something that's interesting, we find that during the reign of the Emperor Julian, he tried to reverse the waning support that the Romans had for the worship of the emperor. A man by the name of Theodosius, he adopted Christianity as Rome's official state religion. Now, people still were worshiping the traditional gods of Rome. But Theodosius was the first one to say that Christians were not criminals. Christians had the right to worship in the Roman Empire. Now, during this time, the Roman Concilia was disbanded. But during the time that the book of Revelation was being penned, was being revealed to John, the Roman Concilia was at the height of their strength. They had a reign of terror over the people. And they carried out some atrocious things against those who would not worship the emperor. Now, when we look at some of the things that history tells us about this Roman Concilia or this imperial cult, we find that their description fits very well with what we see listed here or revealed here about this second beast. They were operating as if they were religious, as if they were doing something good. But yet, when they opened their mouths or when they carried out the tasks that were at hand, they proved that they were doing the work of Satan. They were the enforcers. They were the ones that were making sure that people would bow down and worship the emperor. They were the ones that history has recorded would use these methods of deception. They would awe the people with the things that they claimed to be able to do. But yet, whenever you looked at these individuals, they were the ones that were leading other people to sin. Because they were the ones that were forcing people under threat of death to bow down to Caesar. They were the ones that were handing out the mark of the beast, so to speak. They were the ones that had to authorize these certifications. They were the ones that either approved or disapproved of the actions that people had taken. And they were serving directly under the authority of Domitian. And so in this, we see the first beast and the second beast working together hand in hand. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this second beast and some things that ultimately came about that affected Christianity and that still affect Christianity today as a result of the influence of the Roman Concilia. But we are out of time for this evening, so we're going to go ahead and we'll stop there for tonight. But Lord willing, next Wednesday night we'll pick back up and talk a little bit more about this second beast.